There are over 700,000 sexual offenders in the United States alone. With all the social media these days, how can we protect ourselves and our children from these despicable predators?
Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast, where we discuss criminal cases that involve some factor of abuse. Our goal is to spread awareness of abuse that could be taking place around any of us and encourage everyone to take responsibility and report if they see a child or an adult being abused.
It was a 30-degree night in Lakeville, Minnesota. A spring snowstorm had just finished falling. 5 children were living with their aunt, Tammy Love, and caught in the middle of a custody battle between their 2 parents. Sami and Gianna, the 2 oldest girls, suddenly vanished in the middle of the night. All that was left of them were footprints in the yard across the snow. They had left barefoot and without jackets. Lawyers notify both the parents that their daughters are missing. The parents are completely dumbfounded, and they set the nasty divorce aside and are united to try to find their daughters.
All right, well, this case involves an interesting form of abuse because it's a bit of a mystery. It's hard to say whether this case is child abuse by a father, spousal abuse by a wife, or abuse of power by the court system. So I just want to start by saying I'm sorry my voice is really crappy because of allergies. I might be short on breath and coughing a bit during this, but
I just want to say that my voice is unaffected by the allergies and I sound fine.
Alright, well, this story takes place in Lakeville, Minnesota. The people involved are David Rucki and Sandra Grazzini. They were married in August 31st of 1991. And they ended up having 5 children. Nico was the oldest boy. Then Sami and Gianna and Nia. And then Gino. Sandra was apparently a great mom. She was very attentive to her kids. But in April of 2013, the 2 oldest daughters will go missing in the evening of April 18th. At this time, the parents were in a custody battle after a nasty divorce, and Sandra had just revealed a secret about the family. She said that she'd been suffering for many years of emotional and physical abuse, and she said that David was abusive to her and the children.
There's a ton of family photos and family videos that we got to watch, and we couldn't see any evidence that she was being abused or the children were. All of them looked really, really happy, actually. So it was quite a shock when she made this announcement.
Yeah. A month after the girls went missing, there was a bit of a shocking twist. The girls somehow contacted Fox 9 News, and they met up with them for an interview. So now we knew the girls were okay. Fox didn't know who dropped them off there, but these were the girls that had been missing. And in the interview, the girls said, "I'm just really scared it's going to end really badly." And then they were questioned about David and said he was abusive verbally and emotionally. Our mom was always our protector, but now there's no one here to protect us. And then after that interview, the girls vanished again, and no one knew where they had gone. And their faces ended up on missing children's websites, and they're also printed on plastic grocery bags in the area. And both Samantha and Gianna said that David scared them, and that they had seen him slap and choke their mom, and that he was emotionally and verbally abusive. And the oldest boy, Nico, even had made a Facebook post saying his dad was a bad person and was abusive.
Sandra claimed that her husband David abused her with hammers, that he left black eyes on her, and that she even got broken ribs from time to time.
Oof. Well, let's talk about David's past, because he did seem to have a bit of a criminal history. The information we're about to share are from actual police reports. You can find them online. On December 3rd, 1994, there was an incident where David was arrested. He was at a local pub called Whiskey Junction in Minneapolis, and he had been pretty lit up and had broken a beer bottle and employees asked him to leave, but he refused. He was getting loud and obnoxious, and an argument broke out. He began swearing and threatening to get physical with the employees. And the police were called, and they asked him to leave. And then he began yelling at them. So he was arrested, and according to the police, he swore and hollered at the officers all the way to the jail, and he was very uncooperative. And then he was pretty quiet for 14 years, but on August 21st of 2008, David had another incident, this time with immediate family. David's mother had just died, and the family was trying to figure out how the trust fund money would be dispersed, and there was a complaint filed against David by his niece's husband. The mother that died actually requested that upon her death a lawyer would be present with the family because she knew it would get hostile. So that's kind of telling of the family dynamic there. But Christopher Gary By was David's niece's husband, and he called the police and reported that David had been waiting for him outside and confronted him the moment he got out of his vehicle with his son. Apparently, David was outraged at Chris because the lawyer was present, which is weird because the mother is the one that requested the lawyer to be present. But he called him a piece of...
Shice.
Yeah, censored version. And said, "You must feel really good about yourself stealing money." But David reportedly had his nose pressed up against Chris's nose and said, "I'm coming after you and you won't see me coming." And then he said, "It probably won't be me," implying that he'd get someone else to get Chris. And then as he got in his car to leave, he was yelling, "Let's go, let's go." As in, let's get this on. I'm going to take you down in a threatening way. So Chris was genuinely afraid of David and wanted to press fifth-degree assault charges, but was worried that it might make David even more angry. So the police, they went and interviewed Chris's son, Tommy, because he was there when they got there. And he said that his great-uncle approached them in the parking lot and was yelling at his dad using the F word. So way to go, David, swearing in front of a child. But when the police were trying to get in contact with David, he took the family and went on a trip to Arizona to, quote, escape the stress, which is understandable if his mother just died and the family is going through a rough time. But the investigator had finally gotten through to David 4 days later. But after the investigator introduced himself, David hung up on him. And this all led to Chris, David's nephew-in-law, getting a restraining order against David. So, a family member... This is the first instance of a family member taking out a restraining order against David. And at some point, David had been an owner of a trucking company, reportedly a multi-million-dollar trucking company, and was making pretty decent money, but that ended up going out of business. On April 21st, 2011, Sandra ended up filing for divorce against David. She got the house that the family was living in and custody of the children, but allowed David to keep his office in the basement until he found another space. Sandra stated that the family had 3 other houses that David got to keep.
On May 21st, 2011, a month later, Sandra was in her bedroom, and a friend of hers was with her getting ready for work and changing clothes. Sandra reported that David stormed into Sandra's room, not knowing her friend was there, and started yelling about rumors that she was starting about him. Then reportedly said he was going to kill her, punch her, and come after her for custody of the children. She said she didn't think he actually wanted to kill her, but just wanted to scare her. Then he started pulling wedding photos and other photos off the walls, and the children heard the commotion, and according to Sandra, they were pretty frightened. Then Sandra reported that he had been physical with her in the past, pushing and shoving her, but she hadn't reported it out of fear of what he would do when he got out of jail. She recalled an instance when he ripped the leg off an organ and put it on her neck, trying to choke her. Then she said it was too difficult to talk about these issues. The officer reported that she looked visibly shaken, and it was clear she was afraid to have David arrested. She reported an instance where David came into the house with a gun, saying, "I've got 6 bullets, one for each of the children and one for Sandra," in the presence of the 5 children.
And the children corroborated that statement. And actually, shortly after this, he left a voicemail on his daughter's phone that they ended up bringing to the police, where he said, "Like I promised," and then you heard 6 gunshots go off on the voicemail.
Well, they weren't 100% sure they were actual gunshots, but that's what they think.
Well,
They did sound like gunshots.
they sounded like gunshots, yeah.
Yeah.
So, another month after this, on June 20th, 2011, the Rucki's cul-de-sac neighbors, they're the Martins, and they wrote a letter to Sandra validating her claims about the domestic violence. And this is what the letter said.
This letter is to validate that my family has heard David Victor Rucki yelling and cursing at my family, police officers, and also his own wife and children. On numerous occasions, he has raised his voice in anger at his children. I have even heard him yelling, arguing, and scolding his wife on a cell phone call to her. He truly berated her about being a poor mother. In our near decade of living next to him, I have found him to be a very angry individual who rages at anyone who has contention or confronts him. It got so severe against our family that the court awarded us a restraining order against him in September 2009. As one who does biblical counseling, I am convinced he needs anger management treatment. As police reports can verify, he has boldly cursed profanity at and tried to strongly intimidate Lakeville's female animal control officer. It is logical to conclude that he is capable of more towards those more vulnerable, such as his wife and children. Sincerely, Randy Martin.
And so we see that he wasn't the best neighbor to have, according to the Martins.
There are no good neighbors.
2 days later, after this letter was written, on June 22nd, 2011, Sandra filed an order for protection against David. And that was granted, but on July 17th, 2011, less than a month later, David was served a misdemeanor warrant for violating the order of protection. And then again in November 2011, Sandra had filed an affidavit with written accounts of how David had violated the order of protection. She reported that there were numerous angry text messages that had nothing to do with the children, which were the only text messages that were allowed by the order of protection. But she reported the texts were threatening and showed that David was not in control of his anger towards her, and they made her worry about her safety. She reported an incident on September 30th, 2011. She had gotten her son Nico ready for a homecoming dance. And once he left for that, her girlfriend asked her if she wanted to go out for her birthday because some friends were getting together at the Legends Country Club in Prior Lake. When they arrived, she saw David sitting at the bar. And according to the order of protection, he should have left as soon as she arrived. But he didn't. And so she went on to the other side of the club with her friends and talked for about 30 minutes until someone she went to high school with many years ago approached and said she was friends with the owner of the club and that earlier David showed up with his friend Gus and they had already had disruptive behavior and Gus was asked to leave and he did. And David was later asked to leave as well. There was another father that she knew from her children's school that offered to walk them to the car for protection when they left. So they didn't stay long. And when Sandra got home, Nico, who was at his homecoming dance, told her that David left a message on his phone to tell him, "Your mother is at Legends getting drunk." So the defamation's going both ways there. Another thing that was on the affidavit is on October 7th, 2011, Sandra and the kids saw David videotaping from his car when she was picking them up from school and laughing at them so they could actually hear him laughing at them while they were walking to the car after they left school. Then on October 12th, 2011, Sandra was at the bank, and about 20 minutes after she got there, she was inside and David walked in, and she told the banker she needed to leave, and she did, and David followed her out, and she noticed that his truck was blocking her car in. It was a Rucki trucking dump truck, and so he started laughing at her. This is according to Sandra. Then he made fun of her for needing to use a rental car because he had the family car towed from the home. Then another instance, the children had told their mom that David had been standing on the back porch of the house at 12:30 a.m. on September 27th looking into the house.
That's creepy.
Yeah. But there was nothing the police could do because it didn't violate the order of protection because he wasn't actually entering the house. He was just standing on the porch.
That's weird.
Which seems, yeah, you'd think it would be the entire property of the house that he wasn't supposed to be on, but. And then it happened again at 10:30 p.m. on October 30th. This is according to the children. So, do you want to talk about the harassment that this affidavit reported on the children?
Sure. So David had sent Sami and Nico angry text messages because they had dropped out of hockey, even though Nico explained he'd rather be in choir and theater, and Sami would rather be in pageants. It was so bad that the schools warned Nico and Sami that if they continued to get so many messages during school, their phones would be taken away. He also left angry voicemails for Nico with vulgar language and angry tones. On October 24th, 2011, Sami was walking home from school with some friends, and David pulled up next to them in his pickup truck and gave her the middle finger. She ran home and into the house, worried that he would come after her. Sandra called the police, but said they couldn't do anything about it, and just to keep her safe and in the house.
It mentioned that he left angry voicemails, and there's actually transcripts of that from the courtroom transcripts. And I just wanted to read a few quotes out of it. These were messages for his son, Nico. He said, "I'm calling you because I don't intend to hear from you. Just so you know, I'm still out here. I'm waiting. I'm still your dad, and that isn't going to change. And we will be together soon. And I'm basically going to tell you I'm going to hold you accountable, and you will have to deal with me because you know the way you're treating me is wrong. And I've done nothing to you or the family. And it's important that you call me." I mean, he left a lot of messages, but he said, "Why are you dropping out of hockey? What is it proving that you're dropping out? You're not hurting me. You're going to regret it for the rest of your goddamn effing life, and I'm trying to prevent that." I just think it's interesting that he said he's going to hold his son accountable. He left another shorter message. "What the F is wrong with you? You know what? You effing don't understand." He's really frustrated, understandably, but he's taking it out on his son, leaving these really angry tone voice messages. Sandra dated someone, Michael Redden, for a while, for about 4 months between 2011 and 2012, and he also filed a report about a few instances with the children. Do you want to read those?
One time, as he was driving with Sandra and Samantha to Sandra's sister's house, he pulled into the driveway and saw a black Suburban. Samantha saw it and started screaming hysterically, "Oh my God, it's him! It's him, Mom!" Then she got out of the car and ran towards the house screaming. Then ran back to the car looking terrified and got in, locked her door and said, "Mom, please don't let him get me." Michael had come to the conclusion that they had had some abuse connected to their father based on his experience and education as a former police detective. As an example, whenever they talked about their experience with their father living in the home, it was always filled with negative thoughts and comments about him. Michael also claimed that the children told him that David brought different women back home while Sandra was at work and brought them into the basement, locked the door, and they could hear strange noises and groaning. He He also reported that Nia, one of the youngest, had been sitting on her bed crying, and he asked her what was wrong. She said, "Nothing, I'm scared." He asked, "What are you scared of?" And Nia said, "Him." Then he asked, "You mean your dad?" And she nodded her head up and down. Nico, the oldest, also stated he was sick of being a punching bag for his dad. Michael said that the most disturbing thing is how every time the doorbell rang or there was a knock on the door, all the children would run into their rooms and hide, scared that it was David trying to come in. And that 2 nights in a row, around 10 p.m., Sandra and him heard Sami screaming, and when they checked on her, she said, "I'm afraid he's going to get me again."
Less than a year after the divorce, after Sandra had been granted custody of the children, the divorce was reopened because David was fighting for the custody. So they had a hearing to determine the custody. The second day of the hearing, Sandra's attorney didn't show up, and she asked for some kind of legal representation from the judge, Knutson. But the judge forced her to be pro se, which means you have to represent yourself. And she had nothing to represent herself with, not even a pen or a paper. But Judge Knutson ordered that she must proceed with the hearing. He said, "It's my courtroom, and in family court, I can order you to be pro se. You are not obligated to have an attorney, so you will continue." Which kind of makes it an unlevel playing field for how this case is going to turn out. But apparently in civil and family cases, you don't get public defenders, even though your children could potentially be taken away from you. It's weird because we pay for the public defenders with our taxes for murderers and rapists, but not apparently mothers fighting for the custody of their children aren't entitled to that right. So that's kind of odd that it's more important to defend terrible crimes with victims than it is to defend the rights of a mother. Needless to say, the trial started off on the wrong foot, but Sandra had to put David on the stand during this trial and question him with absolutely no preparation. But after this trial took place on September 7th, 2012, Elizabeth Henry, who was Sandra's new attorney, called Sandra and said, "You have 2 hours to leave your house. You need to be out by noon. You may take your suitcase that the airline owns," because she worked for an airline. And she said, "If you don't leave the house, you'll be incarcerated. Do not tell your children." This was on the order of the judge. And then he also ordered that the children live with their aunt on Sandra's side. And 7 months later, in April 2013, the kids were brought to a police station and told they'd be living with an aunt on their father's side. The oldest daughter testified that, "I wanted to go home to my mom. I just wanted it all to end." Sandra had lost all the custody of her children, and it had been awarded to David's side of the family. And she was also now homeless. So, I mean, this man's children seemed to fear him. They didn't want to go live with him, which is kind of like, where would that come from? So, once the children had moved in with their Aunt Tammy, that was the aunt on the father's side, Samantha started to freak out. She would go into the bathroom, lock the door, and turn on the shower so no one could hear her, and then she'd call her mother begging for help. So now we're sitting in April 2013. The children seem to be miserable, and Sandra seems to be helpless. And that's what brings us to where the girls escaped. Sandra had been questioned about whether she helped her daughters escape, and she said, "How could I help them escape? I've had no contact," because, as we just said, she was ordered to not talk to her children, to leave her children, and not talk to them again. So do you want to talk about how they were found?
Well, first, I want to talk about David and how he also has a totally different side of the story. David claims, and most of the family court officials claim, that the children had parental alienation syndrome. This is the process and the result of psychological manipulation of a child into showing unwarranted fear, disrespect, or hostility towards a parent or other family members. Family court found that Sandra was manipulating her children into fearing their father and awarded David full custody of all the 5 children. Parental alienation is something that's used in family courts very often against the parent who accuses another parent of abuse when the children go along with it. A psychologist said that the girls needed to be deprogrammed after describing the girls as being brainwashed by their mom to hate their father.
Now I want to mention this is all based on the fact that there was no actual hard evidence that David had ever abused the wife or any of his children, so they couldn't make a ruling and take his children away without evidence of abuse.
David claimed that he never abused his children or his wife, and it's not anger that he demonstrates, it's just his frustration. He even hired a private investigator to follow Sandra in hopes that he would find his daughters, thinking that she had something to do with their disappearance.
I have kind of a problem with that statement, that it's not anger, it's frustration. I know he was in the middle of an interview and kind of put on the spot, but with all the past reports that we read, like legit police reports, I just want to share this one last report that happened in June of 2014. There was an incident of road rage with David and a man named Troy Witt. David had cut off Troy in traffic, and Troy got really angry and decided to pass David and flipped him the bird as he drove by. Then he cut David off in return. So Witt was on his way to Cub Foods, and he pulled into the parking lot there and noticed that David had been following him, and he followed him into the parking lot and parked right behind Troy. And when Troy got out to go into the grocery store, David Rucki reportedly got out of his truck and got in Troy's face by the cart corral. They got into a yelling match, which ended in David pushing Troy into the cart corral and storming off to leave. But Troy Witt, who he wasn't going to just take that and let it go, he got angry and went after David. David had just gotten into his car, and Troy slammed David's door on him just as he got in. And then David got out again and punched him, knocking him onto his knees. And then he punched him a few more times while he was down. And then David walked into the Cub Foods. So when Troy made this report to the police, the officer said that he was bleeding from the mouth and lips. He was charged with 5th-degree assault, and he would eventually plead guilty only to disorderly conduct. The difference between 5th-degree assault and disorderly conduct: 5th-degree assault is committing an act with intent to cause fear or bodily harm to someone else. Disorderly conduct is basically just disturbing the peace. So I don't understand how punching someone in the face multiple times is just disturbing the peace and not an assault charge. But so I have a problem with him just saying it's frustration and not anger and rage.
Well, let's look at it from a different standpoint.
Okay.
These girls were missing for 2.5 years. They were found on a ranch, it's called White Horse Ranch, by this lovely couple named Gina and Doug Dolan. These people seem like the sweetest people on the face of the planet. The ranch that they own is strictly a nonprofit organization that's for kids from broken households and abusive backgrounds to go to their ranch and spend 90 minutes or so taking care of these horses for therapy.
That sounds like the kind of place we'd want to promote on this podcast.
And it's still happening. You can still go to this ranch and take care of horses.
What's it called?
White Horse Ranch. They have like 19 horses, some donkeys, and 2 alpacas. They rock.
Do you have the story of how they started that?
I know that the couple had 2 children from really messed up backgrounds come to their ranch, and when they saw their relationship between the horses, they decided that that was their mission. They're really religious, so they thought that it was their way to give back to God. Anyways, these girls were on the ranch for 2.5 years. Gina and Doug took them in. They were never kept at this ranch. They said that the girls were allowed to leave at any time. While at the ranch, the girls were homeschooled. They didn't go to public school, but they were given chores every day to help out with the ranch, the horses, feeding, brushing, doing things like that. They pled not guilty to their charges of helping these girls because they said that they were only doing what they felt was right. Doug claims that he had never seen anyone as scared and terrified as these girls whenever they asked them about their father or their mother. Gina and Doug were only supposed to have these girls for 3 days tops, and these 3 days turned into 2.5 years. They never saw Sandra during this time period. They only received calls, and the girls never even talked to her on the phone. It was only to Doug and Gina.
Yeah.
How did the girls get to the White Horse Ranch? Dee Dee Evold is an activist friend of Sandra's, and Sandra went to her for help. And Dee Dee's the one who told Sandra, these people are a safe place, they'll save your daughters, you can trust them. She knew that they were a good, solid couple. So that's where Sandra brought these girls.
Well, the police ended up finding them there, and you said that Dee Dee's phone records is what left the breadcrumb trail?
Right, Dee Dee is the missing link of how the police found these girls. Because she's an activist, and they found out about it, they went to her house. They were able to search her property, and on her phone, they found a photo of Gianna and Sami on the farm, and they could see the background of it. They found the farm, they traced it back to White Horse Ranch, and there you go. They found the girls just like that.
Yep, and the girls were just doing just fine. They were
devastated when they had to leave.
Yeah. So later on, Samantha, the oldest one, once she was 18, she was brought in to testify during her mom's trial, and she actually commented on the night of the disappearance and the time she spent at the ranch. She said she wanted to get away that night because her parents, before the divorce, had been constantly fighting. She saw her father grab her mother and heard a lot of screaming. And once they had been, right before they escaped, when they were sentenced to, or ordered to live with Tammy Love, their aunt on their dad's side, Samantha testified that she wanted to go home to her mom really badly, and she just wanted it all to end. But she got home with her aunt, like she was ordered to, and she freaked out. And she went into the bathroom, turned on the shower like we talked about so no one could hear, and called her mother for help. She said it was her idea to escape, and her sister Gianna begged to come with her. So the two ran away from the house barefoot across the snow with no coats into their mother's truck. And the girls begged their mom not to return them to their aunt's house. So she took them to that White Horse Ranch, and Sandra, the mother, told the kids she would come see them soon, but never did. But her hands were kind of tied by the courts because the judge had ordered her to have no contact with the children.
Mm-hmm.
So
it didn't look good at first either, because on her Facebook you can see pictures of her during this time that her children are missing, that she's flying across the world because she's a flight attendant, but she's lounging on a boat, she's at hockey games, sports games, and all the while David is looking everywhere, trying to do anything in his power to find these girls. And she at first denied knowing where her girls were or what happened to them. So it wasn't looking good for her at first.
According to David, he was looking. So Samantha told the police that she wanted to run from them when she saw them come up to the house looking for them. The girls were happy at this ranch. That's one thing we know. Legal or not, the girls were extremely unhappy living with their father and scared, and they were happy living at the ranch. But the law doesn't give children the power to make decisions for themselves about where they'll live. So she also testified at the same time that contrary to the statements she made before running away, She said her father had never hit her, and she never saw him hit any of her 4 siblings. This is while she was living with David, just so we're clear on that. She was back from the ranch, and she's been living with David for a while. The way I see it, I mean, yeah, this is wrong. Sandra was arrested and put in jail on $1 million bail, which, how is she going to come up with that, making $30,000 a year as a flight stewardess? But during her sentencing hearing, something her lawyer said stood out to me. He basically laid it out the way it is. And when you hear it put like this, you're like, did she really deserve as much hate as she got? But he basically said the girls made the decision to run away from their aunt's custody. Their mother picked them up. The girls said they'd run again if they were returned to the aunt, so the mom had the choice to either help them get to a safe place or return them and risk them running away to someone else. So to me, it seems like a mom that was concerned about the anger and violence of her husband and the father of her children. And her desire to protect her children blinded her to what was right and wrong, and she tried to use defamation and lying to get the kids away from their father. And she lied constantly, that's undeniable. And it's just a complicated and terrible situation because she might have had started out with good motives of trying to protect her children, but she just went about it in a terrible way, bringing up abuse allegations that were really unsubstantiated. Sorry, I can't talk.
Yeah, I found out that there's actually a protective parent movement. It's a group that believes that the family courts are broken and judges in custody disputes are ordering children to live with abusive parents. It's actually a whole underground operation where families and individuals decide that they're going to take matters in their own hands, and instead of handing over their children in difficult divorce situations, they give them and hand them off to other people in hiding so that they don't have to fork them over.
Yeah. Legally, it's the court's responsibility to take custody of the children and make sure they're safe. But it's weird how much control the law can have over a family. It's mind-blowing that a judge can make the decision of where the children should live, even if they're fighting and begging to live with their mother. He can force them to live with their father. So on July 28th, 2016, the jury found Sandra Grazzini guilty of 6 counts of deprivation of parental rights. She was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in jail, and then serving 15 days per year on November 18th, which was the anniversary of when the daughters were found. So November 18th of every year for the next 6 years after her release, she has to go back and serve 15 days for 6 years. So kind of puts a damper on being able to have a career. It seems like if you have to go to jail for 15 days for the next 6 years.
Yeah, there goes your vacation time.
Yeah. And then Dee Dee Evivold, who you brought up, who helped Sandra find this place, which would be a safe place for the girls. She was convicted on 6 counts of deprivation of parental rights for her role in the disappearance of Sami and Gianna. And it took less than an hour for the jury to convict her on all the counts that she faced. And she ended up getting sentenced to 180 days in jail and remaining on probation for the next 8 years. Personally, that seems like an insane sentence for someone that literally only helped a mother find a safe place for her terrified children to recover and have therapy. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it does seem unfair and unjust, but she still knew exactly what she was doing, so...
Yeah.
If you can't do the time, don't do the crime.
And then Doug and Gina Dolan, who ran that White Horse Ranch, they pled guilty to 1 count each of deprivation of parental rights. And
They pled guilty? Not...
yeah, they pled guilty. And it doesn't say anything about their sentencing yet, but I can't imagine it's going to be good based on the rest of this case. So I don't want to come down hard on either side of this case because David is undoubtedly an angry and kind of scary man for these children. And on the other hand, Sandra is a liar. And I mean, just because you have anger issues or you're violent doesn't make you a sexual abuser. I mean, that's a huge leap. And it was completely unfair for Sandra to bring up fake allegations defaming him. Because, I mean, this trial, the divorce proceedings, while she was pushing these allegations, went on for a couple of years. So there was time before he was exonerated where people thought he was abusing his children sexually and physically. So on both sides of the coin, I understand where they're coming from. Because I honestly think Sandra was just trying to protect her children and what her children wanted. What they said they wanted and what there's recording and video footage of them saying is that they did not feel safe with their father. And in court, the children begged to live with their mother. So
Right. It is interesting, though, that once David had custody of the 3 remaining children, well, and now he has custody of Sami and Gianna, that their oldest boy, Nico, he recants all the things that he said about David. Nico claims to never had seen any abuse. The Facebook message that he posted about his father being abusive and not wanting to ever see him again, now he says that his mother was standing over his shoulder as he typed it. And something that he wouldn't have written if it wasn't for the influence of his mother. He also says that Nico claims that Sandra brainwashed the children and himself. And a lot of people looking at this case say that Sandra was all about getting revenge. That's mostly why all this is happening. Sandra is still not allowed to see Sami and Gianna, but she can see the other children under certain conditions. And at the end of one of the interviews, David claimed that he still wants the mother to be in his children's lives. I think that counts for something. He really doesn't seem that... Well, he seems angry, but he doesn't seem like he's letting all of his anger punch through the TV screen saying he wants her to suffer.
I have 2 comments about that. One, he's putting on a very calm, collected appearance for this TV program where he stated that.
Yeah.
So how he actually feels and what he might actually do about Sandra trying to see her kids could be different from what he says. But I want to believe Nico that his mother kind of forced him and that he recanted these statements, but the 2 girls never have recanted their statements yet about the anger and being terrified of their father.
Right.
So, I mean, I understand the ability or the desire to want to have a close relationship with your father, especially when there's a big part of your life where you didn't, and how you can just shove aside and forget about all the things that your father may have done to hurt you in the past, and your desire to have a relationship with a father figure kind of overtakes that recollection of how much they hurt you, because that's a special bond, being close to your father, and and so I could see how after living with his father for a time, even if his father did terrify him in the past, he wants to be on his dad's side because now they're close and they have a good relationship. But everything I'm saying in this podcast is all, I mean, I'm not taking a side for either one because there's It's so complicated. There's so much more information on this case that we couldn't share in this podcast because it would just be going on forever.
It already felt like it was going on forever.
Yeah, sorry if it got a little boring there with all the police reports, but I just wanted to bring a different side of this case because most of the media and websites that cover this case focus on Sandra being a terrible lying person, and there's not many platforms talking about the facts of David's past and why Sandra might have actually been terrified of him and trying to protect her children. So I wanted to bring that aspect into this podcast episode of what the police report said about David and how that could have affected the way his wife and children felt about him. So, because it does seem like the other platforms are extremely biased towards the mother being a liar, which is true. I mean, she is a liar, but there's mitigating circumstances for sure in this case. But let us know what you guys think. Email us at vovpodcast@gmail.com because I want to know if you guys come down hard on either side of this case, or if you know more about this case that we haven't talked about that you want to share with us. And do you have anything else to say about this case?
Yeah. I didn't really know parental alienation syndrome existed. I think that I know you're kind of leaning towards the mama. I don't know if I'm just toying with the system or what, but I'm kind of leaning towards the dad. Because this syndrome, it doesn't seem like it's that easy to manipulate your children into all of a sudden showing fear and just, having this crazy amount of fear towards a parent. But she seems like a psycho. I feel like day after day and hour after hour of drilling your kids and making them think that they were abused and you don't know this, but when you were a baby, your dad did this to me and he did this to you. I feel like that could really affect children.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe time will tell that Gianna and Sami will grow older and maybe they'll realize that maybe they weren't abused. I don't know. There's really no right answer yet because we just really don't know.
Yeah.
I also learned about Joan Meyer, a professor who studies family court. And this is just in general. It's not just about the case, but she says that if you're a mother and you're claiming child abuse, the chances of you losing your children are going to skyrocket. That you have to have the strongest case or you'll lose access to your children based on the belief that you are brainwashing the children into believing that they're abused. It just shows how corrupt the family court system is.
Yeah. Think of that for people who actually are being abused, but the evidence has been destroyed or they can't build a strong case, that if they are victims of abuse and then they get their children taken away from them, how terrible would that be?
It makes you more understanding about these underground operations that are trying to help children without going to the court systems.
Yeah. Like you were talking about Sandra seeming crazy. Yeah, I definitely, in her mannerisms, she reminds me of people in my life that I know to be manipulative liars. And
she's got wild horse eyes. I don't trust her.
Yeah. But at the same time, living for 20 years with a man that terrifies you can change your brain chemistry and, turn you into a crazy person.
Yeah, maybe it's both. Maybe he's abusive and she's psycho.
Yeah. Or I don't even know if he was abusive. He was just a very angry person. And even if he wasn't, quote unquote, abusive, he still could have been having an effect on her that made her feel paranoid and terrified. And same with the children.
Right.
Like, I don't think he was abusive at all. I think he was just a scary person to live with. If he got into such bad road rage incidents where he punched someone and he had gotten escorted out of a bar by police after refusing to leave even though he had broken beer bottles, and he's obviously, and the neighbors wrote that letter about him. He's not like the comfiest person to be around. It doesn't seem like so. But anyways, we better cut this off because we're getting to the hour marker, which I guess is relatively short for a podcast. But definitely let us know what you think about this case, and please just take 2 seconds and go to the, if you're listening on a Apple device, go to the iTunes store and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoy this. Hopefully, if you listen to this far, you actually enjoy our podcast. So go give us that 5-star rating so we can so you can help out our podcast. We'd appreciate that so much. Mm-hmm. And also, if you want to help support us on our podcast, you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/VOV podcast.
Next week's episode, I'm going to take over, and it's going to be entitled The Girl in the Box.
Yeah, you probably know who that is. But if you don't, get ready for an intense, kind of disturbing story. And a lesson. What's that called? When
Stockholm?
Fable.
Oh.
Fable. That's when it has like a moral, isn't it? A fable. Is it? I don't know.
Cut.
Like Aesop's fables. Anyway, about the dangers of hitchhiking. We'll see you next week.
Toodles.